3,000 years ago, if you walked through the bustling streets of ancient Egypt, you would have seen cats everywhere, sleeping in the sun outside temples, prowling through marketplaces, resting in the homes of both peasants and pharaohs. To the Egyptians, they were living representations of one of their most powerful goddesses, Bastet. Her story is one of transformation and contradiction. She began as a fierce lioness warrior, blood-stained and terrible, protecting kings on the battlefield. Yet over centuries, she became the gentle guardian of the home, associated with music, dance, and joy. How did this dramatic change happen? And why did the Egyptians love her so much that hundreds of thousands would travel across the country just to celebrate her festival? Today, we're going to explore the complete story of Bastet, from her earliest appearances in royal tombs to her legendary battles against the Serpent of Chaos, from her divine family connections to the wild festivals held in her honor. Before we begin this journey into ancient Egypt, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue creating these deep dives into mythology and ancient history. Now let's discover who Bastet really was. Bastet's story began in the mists of Egypt's earliest dynasties. Archaeological evidence confirmed that she was worshipped as early as the Second Dynasty, around 2890 BCE. The earliest attestations of Bastet came from the galleries beneath the famous step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara near Memphis, where thousands of stone vessel fragments from Second Dynasty burials bore short inscriptions mentioning the goddess. In ancient hieroglyphs, her name appeared as Bastet, which evolved through the ages into Ubast, then Bast, and finally Bastet. The hieroglyphic writing of her name contains symbols showing an ointment jar and a loaf of bread. Geraldine Pinch, the renowned Egyptologist, proposed in her work Egyptian Mythology that her name probably meant "she of the ointment jar," as she was intimately associated with protective ointments and healing potions. In Bastet's earliest depictions, she was portrayed with the body of a slender woman and the head of a fierce lioness. This was no gentle household deity. This was a warrior goddess, charged with one of the most sacred duties in all of Egyptian cosmology, the protection of the pharaoh himself. At the Valley Temple of Khafre at Giza, built around 2570 BCE, only two goddesses' names were recorded, Hathor and Bastet. This privileged position revealed her importance to the royal family and to Egypt itself. The pyramid texts invoked her as the royal protector, and ancient inscriptions showed her standing guard over Egypt's divine rulers. In this leonine form, she was associated with Egypt's kings and charged with protecting the pharaohs in battle. She embodied the fierce, untamed power of the lioness, loyalty, strength, and the primal fury needed to defend what was sacred. Understanding Bastet's place in the divine hierarchy required knowing her family. Very little was actually known about Bastet's ancestry and lineage, only that she was the daughter of the sun god Ra. There was no scholarly agreement on the identity of her mother. Some attributed her maternal parentage to the distant goddess, others to Isis, and still others stated they did not know. Most mythologists agreed that Ra was her only parent. This was because Ra, as the creator deity, was called the Great He-She and was considered able to be both male and female. However, Isis could likely have been her mother, as the Bastet variation of her name suggested a connection meaning soul of Isis. During the Old Kingdom, she was considered to be the daughter of Atum in Heliopolis because of her association with Tefnut. However, she was generally thought to be the daughter of Ra, or later Amun. Despite the uncertainty about her mother, her other family relationships were clearer. She was the wife of Ta, and with Ta she had a son named Mahes, also called Mihos. Mahes was a lion-headed god who shared his mother's protective qualities and was known as a warrior deity. Bastet's relationship with Sekhmet, another lioness goddess, was particularly complex. In some myths, they were considered two aspects of the same goddess, with Sekhmet representing the fierce and destructive qualities, while Bastet embodied the gentler aspects. They were sometimes described as sisters, two faces of the same divine feminine power, one the terrible avenger, the other the nurturing mother, yet both capable of switching between these roles. One of Bastet's most important titles was the Eye of Ra. Along with goddesses such as Hathor, Sekhmet, and Isis, Bastet was associated with this powerful concept. The Eye of Ra represented Ra's power made manifest, his ability to see all, to protect and to destroy his enemies. It was believed that every day Bastet would ride through the sky with her father Ra, watching over and protecting him as his solar boat pulled the sun from one horizon to the other. But the true test of her devotion came at night, when darkness fell and ancient evils stirred. Every night, as Ra's solar bark descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, it faced a terrifying enemy. Apep, also called Apophis, was a massive serpent god of chaos and darkness, Ra's sworn enemy. Apep was thought to use a magical gaze to hypnotize Ra and his followers, attempting to devour the sun god while choking the underworld river with his coils. Bastet transformed into her cat form during these nighttime passages to protect Ra from Apep's attacks. The choice of a feline form served a practical purpose. Cats possessed superior night vision, allowing them to see clearly in the darkness, where Ra's solar power was weakest. Various temple inscriptions and tomb texts describe the mechanics of the battle. Bastet would use her sharp claws and teeth to fight off Apep, and she would also employ her magical powers to create spells and charms that would weaken Apep and make him vulnerable. In some versions, she enlisted the help of other deities, Set to use his thunderbolts, Thoth to use his words of power, and Isis to bind Apep with her spells. Eventually, Bastet would succeed in killing Apep or driving him away from Ra's barge. She would then celebrate her victory with music and dance, rejoicing in her father's safe passage. Tomb texts described her shredding Apep into pieces, allowing the sun to rise again. The most famous depiction of this conflict appeared in ancient funerary texts. Spell 17 of the Egyptian Book of the Dead showed Bastet killing Apophis with a knife. However, some sources claim that when Ra destroyed his enemy Apep, he was usually depicted as a cat, and according to these versions, it was Ra himself who transformed into a cat during the fight against Apep, without Bastet being present. This overlap between Ra and Bastet in cat form reflected their close divine relationship as father and daughter. However, this was not a single definitive victory. Apep could return each night, since he already dwelt in the world of the dead, making Bastet's vigilance a perpetual necessity to ensure the sun would rise each morning. This eternal cycle held deep significance for the Egyptians. It represented the natural progression of day and night, sunrise and sunset, life and death, and embodied the Egyptian concept of Mot, cosmic order and balance, that Bastet helped to maintain and restore every night. Beyond her nightly battle with Apep, another legend demonstrated Bastet's role as a defender of cosmic order. This tale was preserved in Papyrus Brooklyn, and it told of Bastet's confrontation with Seth, the god of chaos. In this narrative, Seth stole the Ujat Eye, also known as the Eye of Horus, at a place called Menhat, as for the ancient papyrus. The Ujat Eye was one of the most powerful protective symbols in Egyptian mythology. It represented wholeness, healing, and protection. The theft of such a sacred object threatened the very balance of the cosmos. Seth transformed his appearance to disguise himself and came to Bubastis carrying the sacred eye that he had swallowed. Bastet, referred to in the text as Horit, meaning she who is above, rescued the Ujat Eye from Seth, though the exact method of recovery was not detailed in the surviving portion of the papyrus. What was clear was that this act took place at her sacred city of Bubastis, demonstrating her power within her own domain. By rescuing the Eye of Horus from Seth, Bastet demonstrated her role as a divine protector and defender of cosmic order against chaos. This legend showed that her protective duties extended beyond guarding Ra. She also safeguarded the sacred symbols and divine powers that maintained balance in the universe. Bastet's nature underwent a significant transformation throughout Egypt's long history. From her earliest attestations until the later New Kingdom, Bastet was exclusively shown as a lioness. During the 22nd dynasty, Bastet changed from being predominantly a lioness deity into being primarily a cat deity. As for many of these legends, Bastet and Sekhmet were characterized as two aspects of the same goddess, with Sekhmet representing the powerful warrior and protector aspect, and Bastet representing a gentler aspect. The most famous myth explaining this transformation occurred when Ra still ruled on Earth as a mortal pharaoh. In the myth about the end of Ra's rule on Earth, Ra sent the goddess Sekhmet to destroy mortals who conspired against him. She went on a rampage, intoxicated by bloodlust, and could not be stopped. The fields of Egypt ran red with carnage. Ra himself became distressed and wished an end to the killing. He devised a ruse whereby a plain was flooded with beer which had been dyed red. Sekhmet mistook it for blood and drank almost 10,000 jars of the alcohol. She became so drunk, she slept for 3 days. Some say she woke from her frenzy as Bastet. This was not a taming, this was transformation, a shifting of shape, not of essence. As a cat goddess, Bastet took on new meanings while retaining her protective nature. She became the Egyptian goddess of the home, domesticity, women's secrets, cats, fertility, and childbirth. She protected homes from evil spirits and disease, especially diseases associated with women and children. Why were cats so revered in Bastet's Egypt? Cats were considered demi-deities by the ancient Egyptians. They protected crops and slowed the spread of disease by killing rodents. Cats were seen as smart, quick, and powerful, and they were often associated with fertility, all characteristics that Bastet embodied in her divine form. In her common form, Bastet was depicted as having the head of a cat and the body of a woman. This was her heavenly form. Her earthly form was entirely feline. She was usually portrayed carrying a sistrum, an ancient musical instrument similar to a rattle, in her right hand, and an aegis, a type of protective breastplate, in her left. Bastet's primary cult center was the city of Bubastis, located in the Nile Delta of Lower Egypt. The name Bubastis itself meant House of Bastet. The entire city was essentially her domain. The popularity of Bastet reached extraordinary heights around 945 BCE when Pharaoh Shoshenq I, founder of the 22nd dynasty, made Bubastis his capital. He began constructing a splendid temple dedicated to Bastet, work that was continued by his son Osorkon II, and finished by his grandson Osorkon III. The Greek historian Herodotus, who traveled to Egypt in the 5th century BCE, left a detailed description of the temple. He wrote that, save for the entrance, the temple stood on an island, with 2 separate channels from the Nile approaching it and running around it on opposite sides, each about 100 feet wide and overshadowed by trees. This water surrounding 3 sides of the temple formed a type of lake known as an Isheru, similar to those surrounding temples of other lioness goddesses like Mut at Karnak. One myth related that a lioness, fiery and wrathful, was cooled down by the water of such a lake, and thus transformed into a gentle cat, settling down in the temple. At the Bubastis temple, large numbers of cats were found to have been mummified and buried, many next to their owners. Mummified remains of as many as 300,000 cats were discovered at her temple, clear evidence that ancient Egyptians held both the goddess and her sacred creatures in the highest regard. One of the most complete tales involving Bastet demonstrated her role as an enforcer of divine justice who punished those who violated sacred laws. This story was preserved in a Demotic papyrus from the Ptolemaic period and centered on Prince Setna Khamwas, who learned a harsh lesson about respecting the gods. Prince Setna Khamwas was based on the actual high priest of Ta, Khamwaset, son of Rameses II. Setna was learned in all the ancient writings and was a magician of note. One day, Setna learned of the existence of the Book of Thoth, a magical book written by the god Thoth himself that could enchant heaven and earth and reveal the language of all birds and beasts. This book was buried with Prince Naneferkaptah in the cemetery of Memphis. Despite knowing the book was sacred and protected, Setna's desire for magical knowledge drove him to seek it out. He entered Naneferkaptah's tomb and found the spirits of Naneferkaptah, his wife Ahura, and their son Merab. Despite warnings from Ahura about the terrible fate that befell their family because of the book, Setna insisted on taking it. Naneferkaptah challenged Setna to a game of Senet, a board game with 52 points. Each time Setna was defeated, Naneferkaptah struck him with a spell, sinking him deeper into the ground, first to his ankles, then his waist, then up to his ears. Setna called for his brother Anheru to bring him magical talismans. With these charms, Setna freed himself, seized the Book of Thoth, and fled from the tomb. Later, While Setna was walking through the Temple of Ptah in Memphis, he saw an exceptionally beautiful woman named Taboubu and instantly lusted after her. He sent his servant to ask who she was and learned she was a noblewoman, daughter of a priest of Bastet. Setna sent his servant back to ask if she would spend an hour with him in return for 10 pieces of gold. She refused this vulgar proposition, but invited him to come visit her at her home in Bubastis, the city sacred to the worship of Bastet. Setna traveled to Bubastis, entering the very heart of Bastet's power, and went to Taboubu's house. When Setna reached Bubastis, he told her they should get to what they had come together for, but she stopped him and gave one demand after another. First, she demanded he sign over to her all his lands and worldly possessions, which he did. Then she had his children brought to witness this transfer and make it legal, and he agreed. Finally, she demanded that his children be killed so they would not contest the transfer later. In his deluded state, Setna agreed to this too and had them killed. When he finally moved to take Taboubu, she screamed and vanished, and he found himself naked in the street. His father, the pharaoh, discovered him in this humiliating state and revealed the truth. Everything Setna had experienced was an illusion. His children were alive, his possessions intact. It had all been a dream. The beautiful woman Taboubu was believed to be a manifestation of Bastet herself, serving in her role as punisher of those who offended the gods. Through this illusion, Bastet forced Setna to confront what he was truly willing to sacrifice when consumed by lust and greed: his wealth, his dignity, even his own children. Realizing his ignorance, Setna returned the Book of Thoth to Neferkaptah's tomb, making amends for his theft and showing proper respect for the dead and the gods. Some myths positioned Bastet as the mother of Anubis. The jackal god's associations with Isis came fairly late in the development of the Egyptian cosmology, and his connection to the ancient Bastet likely predated them. This maternal relationship made theological sense when one examined the domains of both deities. Anubis was the god of embalming and mummification, while Bastet was the goddess of perfumes and protective ointments. These roles naturally complemented each other, as the embalming process required the sacred oils and ointments that fell under Bastet's domain. Bastet's powers extended across many aspects of Egyptian life. She was primarily known as the goddess of home, fertility, and childbirth, embodying the nurturing aspects associated with motherhood. Additionally, she was associated with music, dance, joy, and love, reflecting the Egyptians' appreciation for these vital elements in life. Due to her protective duties, she earned nicknames including the Lady of the East, Goddess of the Rising Sun, and the Sacred and All-Seeing Eye. She was also known as the Goddess of the Moon, thought to be both the Eye of the Moon and the Eye of Ra, bridging the solar and lunar mysteries. While Bastet was originally and primarily a solar deity as the Eye of Ra, she later acquired lunar associations as well. Bastet was related to Wadjet, one of the oldest Egyptian goddesses from the southern delta, who was dubbed Eye of the Moon. Through this association with Wadjet, Bastet inherited the lunar title. Owing to her association with fertility and pregnancy, Bastet earned the title the Eye of the Moon. The moon had long been connected to fertility cycles in Egyptian thought, and since cats were seen as extremely fertile animals that could produce multiple litters each year, this lunar connection made theological sense. The lunar aspect became more pronounced during the later Greek period. The Greeks decided that Bastet was a moon goddess, although she was originally considered to be the daughter of Ra and the Eye of Ra. In the Greek period, Bastet was likened to Artemis and became a goddess of the moon, in spite of her original association with the sun. Since Artemis was a moon goddess in Greek mythology, the Greeks associated Bastet with lunar qualities when they encountered Egyptian religion. There was also a practical reason for this lunar association. Cats were primarily nocturnal creatures with excellent night vision, making them natural symbols of the moon and nighttime. This observation reinforced Bastet's connection to lunar mysteries. Thus, Bastet held a dual solar-lunar nature: Eye of Ra protecting the sun during its journey, and Eye of the Moon watching over the night. This duality perfectly suited her role as a goddess who protected both day and night, bridging the solar and lunar mysteries of the cosmos. Egyptians called upon Bastet to ward off illness, particularly contagious diseases. Her priests served as healers, offering treatments alongside prayers and protective amulets. She protected against venomous creatures like snakes and scorpions. In one myth, the cat goddess was stung by a scorpion. The poison was spreading throughout her body, and she invoked the rage, power, and healing abilities of Ra to drive away the poison from her body before she perished. Her association with ointments and perfumes was not merely cosmetic. These substances had practical protective purposes. They could repel insects, treat wounds, preserve the dead, and mask unpleasant odors that might indicate disease. As the goddess of these protective substances, Bastet embodied both physical and spiritual protection. Despite her gentler cat form, Bastet never lost her dual nature. She maintained a double aspect of a protective, nurturing mother, and that of a ferocious and vicious avenger. Her titles reflected this duality. She was called both the Lady of Dread and the Lady of Slaughter. Although she became milder in her cat form, she remained no less dangerous to those who broke the law or abused others. When a household cat would die from old age, the entire family would descend into profound grief. They would shave off their eyebrows as a sign of mourning and remain in this sorrowful state until their eyebrows grew back. Herodotus related that of the many solemn festivals held in Egypt, the most important and most popular was that celebrated in Bubastis in honor of Bastet. Each year on the day of her festival, the city was said to have attracted some 700,000 visitors. Herodotus left a vivid description of the journey to Bubastis in his work The Histories. He wrote that as people sailed toward Bubastis, men and women traveled together in great multitudes in every boat. When they finally reached Bubastis, they held the festival with great sacrifices, and more wine was consumed during those days than during the entire rest of the year. This matched well with Egyptian religious texts, which prescribed that lioness goddesses were to be appeased with feasts of drunkenness. The festival freed women from normal societal constraints. They celebrated by drinking, dancing, making music, and displaying their bodies. This represented both fertility and a temporary suspension of everyday rules. The narrative of the festival mirrored the myth of the Eye of Ra, in which the angry goddess was soothed with music, dance, and wine, transforming from a wrathful lioness to a benevolent deity. Though protection of the living was Bastet's primary role, she also had a place in the realm of the dead. She played a role in the afterlife as a guide and helper to the dead, although this was not one of her primary duties. Bastet served as a guardian on the dangerous journey through the underworld. Tomb paintings showed her watching over the deceased, while cat figurines in burial chambers provided magical protection. Her image appeared on headrests to keep evil spirits away during the vulnerable sleep of death. Her night vision made her particularly helpful in guiding souls through the underworld's shadows. The ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead mentioned Bastet in several important spells, including during the crucial weighing of the heart ceremony, where she helped protect the deceased from accusations and ensured fair judgment. Bastet's status as one of the most popular and potent deities continued throughout the remainder of Egypt's history and on into the era of the Roman Empire. What made Bastet so beloved across the centuries? Perhaps it was her unique combination of qualities: fierce yet gentle, protective yet nurturing, capable of terrible vengeance yet associated with joy and pleasure. She embodied the paradox at the heart of divine femininity itself: the mother who would destroy anything that threatened her children, the companion who brought music and laughter, the warrior who defended cosmic order every single night. From the Second Dynasty through millennia of Egyptian civilization, Bastet's story evolved from fierce lioness to beloved cat goddess, yet she never lost the essence of what made her sacred: her absolute commitment to protection. She guarded Ra's solar bark through the dangers of the night. She shielded homes from evil and disease. She blessed women with fertility and safe childbirth. She brought music, dance, and joy to festivals that drew hundreds of thousands. and she punished, swiftly and terribly, those who violated sacred laws or harmed the innocent. The ancient Egyptians understood something profound when they worshipped Bastet, that true protection requires both gentleness and ferocity, that love and wrath are two sides of the same divine coin, and that the guardian of the home must also be the warrior of the night. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the mythology of Bastet. If you found this exploration enlightening, please share it with others who might appreciate learning about this remarkable goddess. Her story deserves to be told and remembered, just as the ancient Egyptians remembered it for over 3,000 years. Until next time, may you walk in knowledge and wonder.